tell me.
Just kinda, yeah, you're good to go whenever.
You need a sound.
Yeah, that'll work.
Hey, Lester from Bare Bottle Brewing here, folks. Good to have you on another tasting. So this week's tasting, we're going to go through FestWaves, which is a Fest-inspired Helles lager. So for those who remember drinking, the original Dream Waves was a design where I wanted this lager to be a bit different than like a traditional German Pilsner. I wanted something a little bit less assertively bitter and hoppy, but it's also hoppy in a very different lager sort of way. I mean, hoppiness in all of our hazy IPAs and IPAs, they're very charismatic, they're very pine or fruit or tropical note driven. But lagers can also be very hoppy. They're just hopped very differently and with very different hops. So in this case, this is Hallertau Mittelfrüh and this is Czech Saaz. That is typically the hop bill that we use for Dream Waves as well. Dream Waves really was like, I want to go away from the super crisp, super dry, super bitter German style Pilsners and give something a little bit rounder. You know, hence it's categorized as a German Helles style lager. Helles is really just a word for light. It's just a light lager, so it's not super big in alcohol. It's still around, you know, in the 4.6 to say 5.4 alcohol range. But really, it's just meant to be like an easier drinking lager. So the bitterness, not as high. The crispness, it's not as super dry crisp. It's a little bit softer, and that's kind of the real thrust of what I was trying to get to, was going something with a little bit more rounded, beautiful Pilsner malt character. So Dream Waves traditionally has also been one of the simplest lagers that we make. The original Dream Waves version was 100% Weyermann Pilsner malt. It was a German malt strain from Augustiner. So Augustiner is a very specific, you know, area of Germany where they're brewing these Helles style lagers. And it's a really kind of soft yeast that really helps the malt accentuate. So Pilsner malt, to me, a really good Pilsner malt is super bready. You know, it has this wonderful like inner like wonder bread, you know, cleanliness to it, just rounded, wholesome, just beautiful, kind of very, very light toast character, mostly just fresh bread character. And I love that. And to me, like, that's just a different style of lager where you're getting more malty, grainy notes without being like crystal, caramelly malt at all. None of that. It's super clean, just 100% Pilsner malt, Augustiner yeast, and it used Mittelfrüh and Czech Saaz. So this beer is basically just an iteration of that, where we didn't use the Augustiner yeast strain. We used, this one is 3470, so I think that one's from Safale. I could be wrong, it could be Lallemand. It could be the same thing, I'm blanking. But it's a really like super clean lager strain. It's kind of like the Chico ale strain or the White Lab 001 ale strain, where it is just a workhorse, it is completely neutral, does exactly what it's supposed to do, ferments really clean. But I think it kind of leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of accentuating some of the subtle malt characters. So I've been kind of like looking for different ways to, you know, use 3470, which we really like using in all of our lagers because it's so versatile, but kind of get back to the original FestWaves philosophy of being very malt focused. And so it just kind of lined up. You know, Magic was meeting with some different maltsters, and you can see here the malt that we use is a 100% UK malt. From Paul's, and it's called Paul's Odd Amphibian Lager Malt. It's such a strange like logo. Like we don't save bags because we go through thousands of these, you know, it seems like in a month. But we save the ones that really just kind of give us a chuckle, and this one was really just so odd and so strange. And when they dropped off a bunch of malt samples, we tried this one in particular, and it had this like Maris Otter, which is also a very famous UK malt. Had this really rounded, this really big, sweet, like malty note to it. which I felt like would go really well with the lager malt. I think it would dry itself out, it would clean itself up, in this really clean base. And we would still be able to accomplish kind of that two-factor, nice, rounded, beautiful malt character, as well as a touch of bitterness, but really just kind of that nice, wholesome, like you can drink this like bready, clean, relatively light lager beer kind of all day long. So that is my short 2-minute story condensed in 10 minutes. And I'm gonna kind of jump in now and do a very quick tasting, and also I just kind of want to show to everybody, like, this is the way the beer looks. It is pretty light, it is pretty clear, it is not quite crystal clear, you can't quite see through it. Here at Bare Bottle, we don't have a mechanical filter, we don't have a centrifuge. Everything that we do to clarify a beer is really just, we use a additive called Biofine. Biofine is a vegan kind of, it's a vegan kind of enzyme, if you will, that really just kind of helps drop solids out of suspension to help clarify the beer. So, but just a way to kind of clarify the beer a little bit more naturally than shoving it through a filter. In the aroma, you can kind of really quickly, like, you get that, if you can even describe dry as an aroma, but it has that kind of drying quality of, like, not really Ritz cracker, but more saltine cracker, in that there's no butteriness. It is just like this clean crispness of grain. And it's really pretty. You can smell the malts, especially as it warms up a little bit. And that's another thing for lagers, is everyone thinks you need to drink it ice cold. That is really just a figment of the bud, the Miller, the Coors, where they want you to drink it super ice cold. Obviously ice cold drinks are fun and refreshing, but also, like, you don't really taste a lot of flavor at the extremes on your palate. So things that are super hot, like a really hot coffee, you actually can't taste that much. And a really cold drink, you can't taste as much either. Maybe it's by purpose they say drink ice cold. I'm not gonna go into that conspiracy theory. But, judge for yourself. But as it warms up especially, you start getting these really nice, like, white Wonder Bread center, like not even the crust of that Wonder Bread. Really, really pretty in the nose. And then flavor. It has that really nice, rounded, bready note, exactly as we were going for. Probably like as much of a bready note as kind of that first iteration that we did with Weyermann Pils and Augustiner yeast. And it's kind of fun to be able to get very similar characters in different combinations. So a completely different Pilsner malt yeast, as well as a Pilsner malt, as well as a completely different yeast. So really, really kind of nice. It's refreshing. One thing that we found pretty interesting as it was fermenting was, as the sweetness kind of began to dissipate, began to get consumed by the yeast, there was just a slight like twinge of almost like acidity to it. And it's still a little bit there in the sense that it really kind of lightens the body. So that's something that we thought was really fun. And so we're gonna kind of play around with this malt a bit more to see, like, oh, that's a really nice quality. It really kind of helps it from not being like too sweet. I think that little twinge of almost like a lemony acidity like kind of helps keep it even cleaner and drier. So this beer I'm a big fan of. Again, I think anybody who writes a recipe for a beer should say they're a big fan of it and they're biased, and they are biased. But I think it's a really good beer. It's really fun. I love the look of the cans. I love the German flag look. And we thought that, like, this flavor of this malt would fit really well with an Oktoberfest style beer. Yeah, the main thing when brewing lagers is, we kind of fell victim to this too, which is we didn't make a lager at Bare Bottle for the longest time, for at least, call it 2 years. Because there's just like this stigma, not even a stigma, but there's just like fear that lagers are so hard to make. It shows every flaw, which it does, but if you are a relatively clean, good brewer to begin with, lagers are really no different. The only difference is temperature control. And so for a lot of home brewers who leave their carboys in their closet or in their garage, You can't do that with the lagers. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's the beauty of ales, and why ales and IPAs are so popular to brew at home, is because you can basically, once you make your wort, chill it down, put it in carboy, you can forget about it, and it can go up to 80 some degrees and cool down, and it's going to be fine. With the lager, you definitely need temp control. You're probably better off using a yeast strain like 3470, just because it is a lot more versatile than a lot of other lager yeast strains. And I mean, even if you ferment it a little bit warmer, it does still come out really clean. So this is always, I think, the best lager yeast to use as a home brewer. And then it's just getting like great quality like Pilsner malt. So whatever Pilsner malt you want to try, like I think half the fun is also, doing 100% of different Pilsner malts and seeing like which Pilsner malt you like the most of. And as I mentioned before, the temp control is super, super big. So what you want to do is you want to have, ideally, I know it's tough in San Francisco, but you want to have a spare refrigerator or find a friend's spare refrigerator. Keep it in the high 30s, the low 40s, and then just forget about it, once it's fermenting. And then it's going to be completely fine. You just can't forget about it in the corner of your garage. It needs to be forgotten about in the corner of your garage in a refrigerator. But 30 days later, 45 days later, you're going to have a really fun, cool lager.